our job in life is to make the best of what we have in our own hands. So the call to action this week is
40 weeks for men. 40 weeks for men. 40 weeks for men.
week 35, thinking about the baby developing in the womb. This time we're thinking about the best of everything, making the best of everything. And we're going to look at the baby at week 35 and think about how it's developing in the womb there and learn together. So as we do here, I'm going to start off by educating, learning together, and then we'll witness to my experience, and then we'll talk about society at large, and then we'll call listeners to action. So let's start off with the learning together part of the conversation. Thinking about learning together, there's a couple of things. Well, there's many things happening in the womb or the uterus or mommy's tummy as the baby's developing, as week 35. So, as we said previously, the baby's put on that good healthy weight, so that when the baby is born, it can better manage its temperature. So it's very good for managing temperature, having that healthy weight underneath it, underneath the skin. And I think that's really happening in there. We spoke about this as well, is that it's quite restricted. So obviously as it gets bigger, there's less space in the womb. So it's quite curled up and restricted in there like this. But even though it's very curled up and restricted in there, this is the point to remind us that there is so much movement happening. And actually, if the partner or you are not feeling the movement, or we call it reduced fetal movements. So if the movement, the pattern of movement has decreased, then you might want to seek medical attention and call for help. Not you plump, you listeners. You might want to call for help and seek medical attention. Because at this point, even though the baby is developing at week 35 and quite restricted in the womb, there's lots of movement happening. And there's lots of movement that should be happening. And this is what we're going to talk about more so as we go on in the episode. But it's really important to realize that sometimes we feel restricted as people in many different ways. But actually, that restriction can sometimes make it really good for us to make the best of what we have in our hands, the best of our situation. So the baby in there is restricted at week 35 in the womb. Not a lot of space, but a lot of movement is happening. And actually that movement helps the muscles develop and actually is very good for the brain as well. And that pressure against the external surface is good for learning things like proprioception, good for learning where their limbs are, where their hands are, good for learning movements. So that restriction is a good thing sometimes. So in my experience, having my 3 girls, when I think about restriction in movement or restricted movement when there's not a lot of space, I think about how we were so focused, especially in the first pregnancy, about how the movements were supposed to be happening. And we were quite anxious all the time, actually, about is the baby moving enough? There was a little trick that I found helpful that I wanted to pass on to those that are listening, and you may have already done this yourself, actually. But actually, if you're concerned about the baby's movements, one thing that can be helpful is giving the mother or the partner a sugary drink in order to help them it sort of wakes the baby up. It makes the baby move around, in my experience. Especially in my first pregnancy, not so much in the last one, but especially in the first one, there was like movement when they was given a sugary drink, like a sweet drink. I won't plug in. There's loads of sweet drinks But it's really important as well to see, we've spoken about diets in the past and feeding well and helping our partner eat and drink well, and obviously looking after our partner's teeth. We do want to make sure the baby's moving correctly. Now it's time to talk about society at large. So here we go back to the Bible and we try and learn from that. So I'm going to read a parallel verse, a verse that I think is helpful to think about the best of everything and moving even though restrictions happen. And I think we can go here to Exodus chapter 4, verse 2. And so I'll go ahead and read it from the English Standard Version. It's good, nice and easy. It's the second book of the Bible after Genesis. And it's Exodus chapter 4, verse 2. Here we go. The Lord said to him, "What is in your hand?" So you need the context here to understand the point I'm trying to make. So I'll just give a brief context, but please go and read Exodus chapter 4, the whole chapter. Read Exodus chapter 3, that really give you some good understanding. Read the book of Exodus. And actually it's funny because in the New Testament, the book of Exodus is quoted by Jesus a couple of times. So yeah, read the book of Exodus, read good, and read the New Testament. But just to give you a bit of context here, so that we're all on the same page, no pun intended. Here, Moses is being given a task by God, and he's approaching what seems to be miraculous to him, like really confusing. It's called the burning bush moment. So the bush that he's seen is burning like flames, but there's not burning up. So he approaches that bush and God is speaking to him after that bush. In this recording in the Bible. So God is speaking to him about that burning bush. And in that moment, he's giving him tasks like go and help the children of Israel. And Moses is basically like, God, they're not gonna listen to me. How are they gonna know it's me talking or you talking through me? I don't have any authenticity here. It's not gonna work. And this is how God responds. Like I read in Exodus chapter 4, verse 2. Moses, what is in your hand? And I think there are things that we can learn here. Because I think that sometimes making the best of everything is actually realizing what we actually have in our own hands, what we can do in our day-to-day. And like I look at the baby developing at week 35 of gestation, I'm like, this baby's restricted in the womb there, obviously getting bigger hopefully, but restricted, but it's still moving around and making the best of what it's got, making the best of a bad situation. And I think we can learn from that. I think we also need to make the best of our lives. We need to ask ourselves, well, what is in our hands, so that we can make the best of our lives and actually really make the best of life. That's what. Now it's time for the call to action for the listeners. So the call to action this week is actually stemming from a question. So the question, like we spoke about in the talk about society at large question, part of the conversation, we spoke about that. So the call to action this week is this question: what is in your hand? What is in your hand? I want to encourage everyone listening to really think about that. You may want to write it down in your phone or on the digital device. You may want to write it with paper. You may want to write what is in your hand. You may just want to think about it and actually just like really process what is in your hands. Because really, I think it's really important that we realize that we can make the best of what is in our hands. So we can make the best of everything. You know, what my neighbor down the road has in their hands is very different to what I have in my hands. But I think our job in life is to make the best of what we have in our own hands. So the call to action this week is ask yourself the question, what is in your hands?